one of the ways that actually banks, especially retail banks, can help is retail bank can essentially tokenize your identity and your purchasing history, right? Through the bank experience as an example. So there's ways to essentially know that this agent really is working on behalf of a human versus a scalper that's trying to buy 100 tickets.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Typhone. Typhone is the creator of Infinia, a dramatically better digital banking platform for community financial institutions, as well as several platform-agnostic, revenue-generating point solutions. Our highly configurable platform and broad ecosystem of third-party partners ensure our entire suite is scalable and extensible to meet the needs of any FI. On our podcast, you will hear host Josh DeTar discuss today's most pressing financial technology topics with seasoned industry experts from every possible discipline.
You know, your podcast hasn't officially made it until there's ads in it. But this is one you're not going to want to skip past. And, well, if you do, feel free to hit that fast forward 15 seconds button twice. Ever wonder what gives me my energy and enthusiasm during these podcasts? You know, outside of my relentless desire to learn about, connect, share, and build up community FIs and their mission to support the communities they serve? It's coffee, and lots of it. Now, you want to know what's better than your regular old coffee? How about donating $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals through Credit Unions for Kids every time you purchase high-quality, ethically sourced coffee that also provides living wages to coffee farmers. So if you want to listen to this episode with epic levels of caffeine-induced focus and help kids in need, head to javaforkids.org to learn more and buy a bag or 10. Thanks.
Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Amir Sarhangi, the CEO and co-founder of Skyfire. Oh goodness, another episode on AI and payments. Really? Yes, really. And I'm actually super pumped about it. Why? Because there's so much to discuss in this space, and frankly, the unique perspective of a guest has a lot to do with what we end up talking about AI and payments. 2 minutes into my first conversation with Amir, I knew this was going to be fascinating. So let's get a little background on Amir. I always like to ask my guests, what's the most important thing for people to know about you? And Amir responded without hesitation and with true conviction, I want people to know about the love I have for my family. So a little background here. This background also tells us a lot about the story of Amir being on his fourth startup, by the way. Now, Amir immigrated to the US when he was 11 years old. He and his dad always had a dream of starting a company together. Fun fact, it wasn't even in tech, but we'll get the details on that here in a second. Now, unfortunately, life had other plans, and Amir lost his father tragically before that dream became a reality. Now, rather than halt his passion for starting something, that moment provided fuel for it. Now, unfortunately, yet again, his first startup was way too early for the market and ultimately ended up not being successful. That again only fueled him more. It takes a lot to get up when you fall off the bike, but the more you fall, the easier it gets to get back up. And that's exactly what Amir has done time and time again. I think he's really an amazing success story of resiliency. And so much of that comes from the family and the upbringing he had and the family he cares so much for today. Amir later started the company that ultimately became Android messaging that now even Apple uses. So if he'd never gotten back up, well, you might not be able to text your friends like you do now. Amir loves the highs of creating and building, but he's also built a foundation of tools through life and experiences to help him get through the lows of being a founder. So how did he get into payments and AI, and what has this all got to do with AI and payments and all the things we just talked about? Stick around and find out, because we've got some really cool ideas and use cases to discuss from the perspective of a company's founder, and some things that you should be thinking about as you navigate the new landscape of payments and AI and working with companies in that space. So Amir, thanks for joining me, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
All right, so we got to start out with I didn't want you to tell me this story earlier because I wanted to hear it like and get my reaction live. But when you just casually dropped, you're like, yeah, my whole world has been in the tech space, had 4 tech company startups, but the first one was going to be chocolate. I was like, hang on, we got to go back to that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what was this chocolate company that never got to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I talked about it. But so when I was growing up, I grew up in Iran. I moved here when I was 11. And before moving here, Iran at that time was during the war. So, there wasn't a lot of luxury, including things like candy and chocolate. So a lot of times where family would come from outside, like from Europe or from US to Iran, the only thing as kids we would ask for was candy and chocolate because the quality of the chocolate in Iran was terrible. So I had this, desire and really this thing that just got, kind of built into me over those years was that I'm going to start a really high quality chocolate company. There's no reason why we can't have Swiss quality chocolate in Iran. So that was really, we talked about that a lot with my dad as I was going, through high school here and then college. And, that I was planning to move back and, start a chocolate company. And it's something that, to this day, I still have a lot of passion for because I love chocolate. And so that part of it hasn't changed.
Well, I'm down to get together with you for some chocolate anytime. I'm one of those people, if I don't have at least a half of a bar of dark chocolate before I go to bed, like the day's not complete.
Exactly. For me, for whatever reason, there's no dessert that can take the place of chocolate. That is the ultimate satisfaction for me, is a good, high quality piece of chocolate. So yeah, we'd love to do that with you.
Well, yeah. Now, maybe by the end of this podcast, we're going to have a business plan. We're going to start a chocolate company in Iran together.
There you go. Perfect.
I'm into it. Like, bring the world good chocolate. Sounds pretty awesome. So, okay. So then how do you go from chocolate to tech? Like, walk me through a little bit of that.
So, yeah, I mean, look, my first job out of college I was working in consulting for Deloitte, which was great because I got a chance to see a lot of different industries, was a lot in the telco space. And it happened to be at the same time as kind of the internet boom. And, there was all these different companies like Webvan, which no one hears about anymore because they went out of business. But Webvan, Google, a lot of household names that you hear today were created during that boom. So, given that I had this desire to start my own company, I was actually talking with another colleague at Deloitte and a couple others within the commercial real estate industry. And the idea that came up was like, why can't we take the commercial real estate transaction, which is a very complicated, complex transaction, and make it more digital? At that time, commercial brokers really did everything very manually, including their kind of Rolodex of contacts and their listings. Everything was very much manual. And so really that first company, it was called Real Prompt. And the idea really was to bring the commercial broker and the buyer together and make it easier for them to do a commercial real estate transaction. And that was really the initial idea.
Huh. Well, I guess fast forward to today, do you still own the rights to Real Prompt? I bet that's actually pretty valuable given the full AI conversation.
It's so funny you say that. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, we may. I mean, we never, we continue to hold on to it. So we probably do. That's a really good point.
You heard it here, folks. It's on record. Amir, if you make out like a bandit with that, I get a %.
Absolutely. No, I didn't even say, honestly, I have not even said the word Real Prompt in quite a while. So yeah, no, I think we may still have the rights to it. So
yeah, if you still own realprompts.com, go check what GoDaddy thinks that thing's worth now.
That's right. So
that's too funny.
We were way too early to the market. We built a product. We even had, one of our founders was from the industry, someone who had a lot of knowledge of buying commercial assets. But, as founders, a lot of times, even when we really understand the problem, a lot of times we're way early to solving a problem.
Yeah.
And, that has repeated itself over and over again in history, where a really good product or idea has come way too early for its time. And then when things have lined up, another company has been able to come in and do the same thing and be very successful.
That's interesting. I think we should park that and come back to it, because I'd love to get your perspective on, in today's day and age where, so many of these companies are fueled by AI or AI native companies. I'm too early to market today may be totally different literally tomorrow, like not figuratively, like literally tomorrow. So I wonder how that changes the game and that kind of stuff. But before we come to that, I'd love to, just going back to you've had 4 different startups, and we were kind of even talking about this, before we started recording, that, there's this kind of concept that like the hardest thing that you've ever done in life is the hardest thing that you've ever done. And so, I was referencing a speaker that I'd heard a few years ago. And if you haven't heard him speak, I highly recommend it. The Iron Cowboy, who holds the world record for the most Ironmans. And he did 101 in 101 consecutive days, which is just crazy.
Incredible.
But his whole talk track was around like the hardest thing you've ever done is the hardest thing you've ever done. And so you don't necessarily get to compare your hardest thing to someone else's hardest thing, but that person has to compare their hardest thing to their own hardest thing. So his point was, if the hardest thing you've ever had to face is somebody said something mean to you on social media, then that is the hardest thing you've had to face. But if then you have to face something that really and truly is like deeply challenging, are you prepared and equipped with the tools to be able to deal with that? And just as I was hearing your story, Amir, and talking about, some of the challenges that you faced, like you had to face a lot of adversity early on in life and like some big things, not just somebody said something mean to you on Facebook, right? Although I'm sure you probably got some of that too. We all got some of that, but it kind of set you up for success in some ways, right? Because it gave you the ability to kind of bounce back from that first unsuccessful startup and say, hey, that's okay. I'm still willing to try again and start another thing. So I'd love to hear just some of your perspective as a founder. Like, what has that journey been like for you?
I think all founders have their own stories, and there's no lack of, hardship stories that a lot of them have gone through. In my case, I think having lost my dad at a young age, that definitely was not only a wake-up call for me in terms of, look, you're on your own, and you gotta push forward, because I had my mom, my sister, and that were also definitely depending on me. And so that was like the first big kind of mental challenge that I had, finishing school and doing that. And then my first job out of college, with Deloitte, that was great because it kept you on your toes. You were constantly with new customers and new projects that required you to kind of come in with prior knowledge that we didn't have as entry level consultants. And those experiences what drove me to start the first company. I'd say the first company I was definitely deer in the headlights, didn't really understand what it takes to build a company, and also a lot of learnings in terms of like what you really need to know about your customer, who you're building for, and what it takes to then grow that business. So in a lot of ways, I'm really happy that kind of the internet crash happened. That forced us out of that business, Real Prompt. And in a lot of ways, I'm grateful for that, because otherwise we would have probably spent a couple more years doing that, which frankly would have been kind of a waste of 2 more years of my life at that point, because I still just didn't understand how to build a business.
Isn't that crazy to think? Like that's something like that probably at the time felt like the worst thing ever, but now you're looking back on it and you're like, yeah, that was actually pretty good.
I'm telling you, there's so many examples of founders, and I've been, with that first company, and I've seen it so many times where you hang on, because as a founder, you got to be the believer. You're the one who has conviction, and every time you see just a little bit of hope, you continue to hang on and you want to push forward. I think those who understand that balance of knowing when a idea or something that they really believed in is not at the right time or the right place or the right funding or the right team, that's just as much of a winning formula as is knowing when there is, something that's actually going to work and be successful. Because you can really grind it out and put yourself in a really difficult situation. And, frankly, my second company, Jive Mobile, which, ended up being acquired by Google, that was a 10-year journey. And we probably had at least 4 or 5 instances where the company should have been done, and we pivoted the business, as far as I remember, at least 4 or 5 times. And all these weren't major pivots, but they definitely were change of direction, which every time you do that, that's like kind of like heart surgery, because like you're going in and you're trying to convince your founding team, then the extended team, and then your investors that you need to change directions, and you as the CEO or you have to take that responsibility that this new direction is going to work. And then when it doesn't and you got to change again, it becomes even more challenging, right? So, I think all founders, have gone through that, and there is no overnight success story. I think everybody has had that journey. Even the Zuckerbergs, have had that journey to get there.
Yeah, I always think that's interesting. I can't remember what it was. I remember seeing a post on social media once, and it kind of always stuck with me. And it was from some guy who, I can't remember what his company did or what it was, but essentially his post was a picture of his Lamborghini. And it said, "Man, it must be nice to have that." and then it was his whole dialogue around, he goes, "Yeah, a lot of people tell me it must be nice to have a Lamborghini." And he's like, but what they don't realize is that, I think, he was in his 50s or something like that. And he was like, I have 40 years of working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. How many times I've had major losses. I had to reverse mortgage my house, my personal house, to keep my business afloat. And he's like, all of that went into it. So yeah, it must be really nice to have that. And he's like, it's also really nice to have all of the heartache that I went through to get to this point. I thought it was really interesting. Like the way he wrote it was not like egotistical, like, oh, I have a Lamborghini. Like it definitely wasn't that. It was very much like trying to highlight just how much a lot of times, founders, it's the duck analogy. Like they look calm and successful on the surface or whatever, but underneath you don't see the legs that are just going crazy to make it all work, and all the effort that went into it, and all the times that you didn't have the overnight success.
Oh, 100%. The number of times you think you landed a customer, or you think you've landed your next round of funding, and there's just, with every major high, especially if you're a veteran and have gone through startups, when you go through a high, you're already preparing for the low, because there's going to be a low, and then you will have the next high. So that's I think probably one of the tougher things to deal with is the swing that happens, and that's part of the addiction too. Like if you like doing startups, partly is because it really does make you feel alive because of these just extremes that you see. And those highs are really just amazing because, with a small team, when you accomplish something big and impactful, there's just nothing that can compare to it, because all of you were the ones that actually made that happen, especially when you're competing with giants, or you're competing with much larger companies with a lot more resources, and you're out there just working hard to make it happen. So yeah, no, I think that's part of the journey a lot of us go through.
I mean, given what little I've gotten to know about you, just over the few conversations we've been able to have, I feel like you could probably agree to this statement. I used to get asked all the time, like, why I liked being a part of small companies and startups and all of that. And Amir, I used to have a terrible answer for it. I was like, I don't know. Like, do you like getting kicked in the shins? Because that's kind of what it's like. Like, you just wake up and get kicked in the shins day in and day out, and it's a lot of work. And, and then when I actually developed my real answer to why I love doing what I do was when I became a dad. And what I realized was being a parent was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. And so therefore it was the most rewarding thing I'd ever done in my life. And it's like, at the end of the day, I mean, full truth. I mean, I had a rough day the other day with my 4-year-old, and it was like, by the time he finally went to bed, my wife and I just sat on the couch and looked at each other and we're like, whoa. But then you're like looking at the monitor, looking at the kids asleep, and you're like, man, that feels really good. And so I think the greatest rewards you have in life come from the greatest challenges. So if there's no real challenge, is there really a reward? I don't know.
100%. And Josh, what's interesting is like parenthood, even though it's so hard, and when you sit back and enjoy, that accomplishment or that day, that great day that you're able to get through with your kids, as they grow up, you pretty much don't remember the hard parts. And there are some really hard parts, like those nights where you're awake all night, your son or daughter is sick and you're trying to take care of them. It can be really miserable, right? And for whatever reason, the human psyche just cleans all that out. And it's like, do you want to have another kid? Yeah, I'll do another kid. And then you realize, oh my God, like, there was all this stuff that I forgot. And it was just the last year that I went through it, right? And it's the same with startups. It's like, yeah, I want to do it again. And then you come back and say, you're like, oh my God, what was I thinking?
What was I thinking? That's funny. That's actually a great analogy of that. My wife and I literally just cleaned out the last of like the baby stuff, knowing we were done. And we looked at each other and I was like, man, I totally get it. I was like, I get why people have like 5, 6 kids. I'm like, yeah, I forgot about how little sleep we got, over the last couple of years. And all I see is like my youngest running around, running out of, the baby toys and things like that, and thinking, oh, but that was so fun. I want to do that again.
Exactly. Or you watch those old kid videos of them for the first time walking. Oh my God, that was such a great experience, So you're like, yeah, we can have another kid. And then, you have the next one. You're like, oh my God, I forgot all the other stuff that you went through. So it's like having a baby.
That is a really, I love that analogy, because I think that is a really interesting thought process of just the adaptation of the human psyche, right? Like, I mean, if all we remembered was the negative, there'd probably be only one kid and then we'd be done as a species. Like,
100%.
And, you probably would have never started again and again and again if all you thought about was all the hard times. But, you've kind of built the tools and the foundation to get through the lows through the highs.
Yeah. And, I think the first time you do it, you just don't know any better. It's just like having a kid. You don't know any better. So you kind of struggle through it, but at the same time, because you don't know what to expect, your mental state and your body tries to prepare for the worst. So you adapt. And then once you do experience it, some of that muscle memory does come back, and you can, especially, if you have folks on the team that are new, you're able to kind of, make things a little bit more calm and be able to handle the fluctuations. It's like, don't celebrate too early. Just because we had a great meeting doesn't mean, we're going to be able to close that customer, as an example of things that come. And in the same way, when you have a bad experience or a bad day, being able to recover from that quickly and just forget. And having short memory in a space is like one of the best qualities you could possibly have, right? Like, you want to be able to move forward and quickly and pick up and go.
Yeah, I guess, naivety is a pretty powerful tool, because I think if a lot of us knew like what we were going to go through, but I think that also speaks to why it's important to have, a lot of diversity in the thought process and the people that you bring into those types of teams, especially early on, right? It's why you have like the dreamers and the executioners and, the different groups of people that are able to kind of see those things through, because
so true. And I think right now more than ever, because I think those that are, have been around for a while, they have a certain way of thinking pre-AI, kind of days. And then you have kind of the younger talent that's coming through or prompt engineers or live coders, folks that are really using tools to the kind of the ultimate they can, whereas, some engineers that have more experience are a little bit more reluctant to use some of the AI coding tools.
Yeah.
And for everybody has good reasons, right? Having kind of that balance and being able to bring a good mix of people into the team really does help, because people do learn from each other. And especially now with how quickly things are moving with AI.
Yeah. Okay. That is a great transition back to what we parked of, you were talking about how your first startup was too early to market. All right. The market maybe just wasn't ready for it. And we were talking about how, before we hit record, the AI space is just like, it's its own mind-boggling new pace, unlike anything we've ever seen. And so where in the, pre-AI world, like you were saying, there was almost this concept that it's like, hey, you could be too early, and it could be a couple of years before, that reality was going to take off and your idea was going to be widestream accepted. And in the AI world, I mean, too early to market can quite literally be a day, and then tomorrow you're not. And so you're good. And it's like, you were actually spot on the timing, because so much can change in a day. And I think it's funny so for those of you listening in, like when Amir first joined, I was just like, hey, how are you doing? Like, how's the week been? He was like, man, it's been crazy. And that's just kind of like the story of my life, because you were like, man, every day I wake up, I'm like, okay, what changed today?
That's probably the biggest anxiety most kind of AI CEOs have right now, right? And because there's just so much happening at such a high pace, a lot of investment happening, obviously with all the different lens, but then you have a lot of vertical companies that have raised a lot of money, and it's extremely fast paced. And what's difficult about it is that you have to be able to understand not only what is happening and keep track of everything that's going on within the industry, but then try to kind of bring that in and see what impact that has on your business and how that you can use that and leverage that to your advantage. And in which areas do you have to kind of change your strategy so that you can accommodate. And, as we were talking, like sometimes that could happen like, twice in a week. You change the strategy and then you realize, okay, you got to change it again because something new came out. So that, I think that's the biggest, I'd say, thing that I've had to adapt to doing a startup in this kind of AI era is just the pace of innovation and ability to be able to really think, 6 months to a year down the road and build something that is going to be needed very quickly there. And when we started, 6 months ago, when we were pitching our idea and what we were doing, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, it's going to be like 3 to 4 years from now. That's kind of the mentality a lot of people were putting us in, the bucket they were putting us. All of a sudden now it's almost like they're too late. When we talk to people now, they feel like they're too late. And so that's just in 6 months.
Yeah,
that's crazy in 6 months. And this is like venture capitalists that we're talking to, who are typically folks who are trying to invest earlier, right?
Yeah,
and even they were thinking we were early, and that gap has already closed in less than 6 months.
Yeah, that's wild. And I'm only going to say this way because you said it first, so I feel like I'm safe. But you were saying you've also like started companies in multiple different decades, and like you've seen a very different. Like you've had to adapt, not just the type of company that you're bringing to market, but the way you're coming to market, the way you're thinking about, the product that's actually going to serve the customer, meet the market demand, all of that. And you were saying like, being a little bit more seasoned in your 50s, being like, holy cow, like I'm having to think about this totally different than when we started our first, our second, or third company, just because of how much faster and different the pace of AI has changed the thought process you need to have in your business model.
Oh, 100%. And I think, before you had time to kind of build your idea up, you didn't necessarily need to launch right away. Whereas now, at least the way we're approaching it, we're providing quite a bit of transparency into what we're doing. We open up what we're doing in terms of our product. We open it up very quickly and really want to collaborate with the ecosystem as quickly as we could, because that input helps us move faster. Whereas before, I think kind of did things, at least we did it in much more of a closed fashion. And then once we were ready, we'd bring out, here's what we have to show. Here's the shiny object we want to show the world. And just also the pace at which we were shipping product was very different, right? Like you would have a longer period of time between, new releases. And a lot of times you'd plan your roadmap way ahead of time. Whereas now, like our roadmap is literally could change in it every day, where we're switching features and capabilities that we're changing based on what we're seeing in the market. So definitely the approach has changed, and AI tools also help us move faster. So we're leveraging tools that obviously were never available in the past. So those things also help.
Amir, I think you'll get a kick out of this. We, not too long ago, I'll spare any names, but we responded to an RFP from a community financial institution. And one of the questions in there was they wanted to see our 10-year roadmap. And when I went and asked our CEO and product, like, hey, how do you guys want to respond to this? Our head of product responded to me and he's like, dude, I have no clue what I'm going to do in 10 years from now. He's like, at the pace of stuff is changing, like you're lucky to get a year. He goes, if I give you a 10-year roadmap, it's only because I'm going to tell you it takes me so long to build anything that it's going to take me 10 years to build it. He's like, the environment that we're in is so incredibly different. We cannot look at it through a legacy lens. Like it just doesn't, it doesn't apply anymore. And I think especially this is a good segue into like, what does this all mean for a lot of our listeners, right? Like community financial institutions. I mean, this is absolutely an exponential curve, right? And I think what happened was AI flew really under the radar for a very, very long time, especially in financial services. And then the second it started to kind of poke its head up, people were like, oh, it's interesting. What does it mean? And literally just in that time, it grew like a hockey stick so much. And again, I mean, we went from even just 6 months ago having conversations with people and they're like, yeah, I don't know if AI has a place, to, oh my goodness, we're so far behind. Like, what are we doing in AI?
Very true. It's very similar conversations that we've heard and seen. And I think, it does remind me, I'm old enough to remember when I first used Google for the first time as a search versus Yahoo as an example. And it was kind of like that aha moment where I went and told all my friends, like, hey, you guys should use Google. We saw the same thing happen with the evolution of ChatGPT and OpenAI. Same thing. Like, I'm sure the first time you experienced it, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then you probably went and told a bunch of people. So all of a sudden you saw that hockey stick because not only of the quality of kind of experience you had, but then the constant feature evolution and capabilities that just keeps coming at you. Just when you thought you figured it out and you saw all the cool stuff, a bunch of new cool stuff is coming at you. And I think that is creating kind of the excitement, and also it's opening up so many new opportunities for people in terms of what these experiences could be and how it could simplify our lives, but at the same time, in some cases, enrich our lives in terms of what it can do.
Yeah. And again, I think that's a great segue to, it's along those same lines. I think the use cases being more, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, like easier for just everyday people who are not technologists, who are not engineers, to identify, how do I use this to solve a very specific use case? I think when that became more mainstream, like that's when you really saw a hockey stick effect. And I love to use my wife as an example because, when I've been using AI for a very long time because I work in tech, right? And our CEO is a big AI guy. So like we've been bleeding edge on that kind of stuff. And I was always, to your exact point, I was always telling my wife, like, babe, this is so cool. Like you can use these tools. But it really wasn't until ChatGPT kind of hit an inflection point of what it could be able to do. And the first huge light bulb moment for my wife was when she wanted to replant her garden. And she literally put in dimensions, where we're located, what types of food we liked, what could she grow, how should she space it out, how could she maximize it. And ChatGPT gave us this beautiful, this is what you should do. You should plant these things and next to these things, because these bugs will keep these bugs away from this thing. And then you can also make sure that you use the same water dripper in this location. And she was just blown away. She was like, oh my goodness.
Well, it's
this would have
incredible.
taken me
Yeah.
forever to have planned out. And she goes, with one prompt and a couple of nudges, she's like, I had my entire garden planned. And I said, great, draw me a picture of that. And she had a picture of her garden and she just walked out and planted her garden. Right. And then now, I mean, just the other day, she texts me and she was on her way to Costco and she's like, it hit me. I'm sitting in the driveway with the kids and I knew I was pushing nap time and I knew I was going to need to get back. So she's like, I knew I needed to be efficient. She's like, and it just hit me. She literally just took a Costco list, put it into ChatGPT and said, give me the path through Costco to shop this the most efficiently. And it literally told her, like, start in this section, grab these things, then go here, grab this. And she was like, it was the fastest in and out Costco trip. And why I say I think this is kind of also an interesting segue to, again, I want to park that conversation a little bit because I want you to give a little bit of background on why this is something that's top of mind for you before we talk about it, so our listeners get a little bit of understanding of that. But, the next evolution of that is my wife being able to just say, hey, here's the meals that I'd like to plan for the week. Here's a picture of the pantry and a picture of the fridge. Go shop for the rest of the things that I need. Have the things delivered that could be delivered from further away. And I'm willing to go this far to go get these things or whatever, right? And then it just processes all of it, even down to making the payments, getting the things coming. And, I think for a lot of people that might sound like, Skynet level crazy, but I'd argue it's pretty darn close. So, and I think that's a lot of where, your mind is going. So before we talk about that, give me a little bit of context into, we've talked about the AI side of things a little bit, but why is payments something that's important to you in this realm? And then how are AI and payments kind of becoming interconnected?
Yeah. So look, I think the key thing we saw was that, a lot of things we do as human beings at the end of the day require some sort of a financial transaction. And a big part of, AI's value prop is simplifying our lives and being able to make us more efficient, be able to do some of the mundane tasks like you mentioned. And I have a few more examples that I love that I can't wait to be solved, that at the end of the day always require some sort of a payment transaction in order for those things to be complete. Whereas today, in most cases, AI has to turn to the human being to be able to complete that task because it needs a credit card or a bank account or some sort of a financial way of paying for whatever it's trying to do. And some of these things are time sensitive. If you think about something like concert tickets or restaurant reservations or getting the cheapest flight, you want it to be able to do the transaction once it is able to find that one concert ticket that is highly, sought after and is able to find it. You don't want it to wait for you the next day and then, it's already been filled. Similarly with, travel and other things. So being able to actually complete a transaction or a agentic workflow from beginning to end becomes really important in this scenario versus every time the developer or the human has to get involved in order to be able to complete that. And hand in hand with payments comes identity. So it's not just the payment itself, it's being able to attach who's behind that AI transaction and what's the identity of that, which is, for your audience, of course, your audience really understands KYC and KYB and everything that is related to a transaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know where you're headed with one of the examples, and because it's one I really want to, it's something like booking my flights and hotel for me for travel. It's such an obnoxious, mundane task, but to your point, like the agentic ability of AI for me to go in and put my preferences and say, hey, I've got to go, to Austin next week. I don't even have to tell you, that I'm going to stay at a Hilton. I'm going to fly Alaska Airlines when all possible. I want to be as close to the meeting location as possible, but I also want to be nearby a gym that's 24-hour and a grocery store so I can get, my food and go book all of those things. Oh, by the way, like I live, a ways from the airport and Portland traffic is horrible. So don't fly me out during traffic hours, all of that. And then I want ILC, right? And to your point, like sometimes that's all very time sensitive, but if you can actually solve that for me, that's huge. But a lot of times it just gets to the point where it's like, hey, now you have to go and fulfill this. And even then, I think there's a big challenge with, I just very recently used a use case where I needed to help somebody get an emergency flight, how to be with a family member. And I literally just went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, I need the fastest flight from here to here starting now. And it gave me a flight number, a flight plan, everything. I went to Southwest to book the flight, didn't exist. Went back to ChatGPT. I was like, hey, buddy, like, no flight. It was like, oh, yeah, my bad. That flight doesn't exist. I was like, cool. But if it had actually had to go through and book it would have realized that that wasn't available. But, what I really loved for you to talk more about is the KYC element of that too, because then if it's Amir booking a flight on Josh's credit card, we got problems.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a bunch of challenges in getting that done with an agent today. The first challenge is the fact that the agent, first of all, needs to be able to even access the websites. A lot of websites are blocking agents because they're not human beings, right? And that's because of traditionally there's been a lot of fraud using bots. But in this day and age now, you have good bots and good agents that need to do stuff on your behalf. So in order in the first place for that agent to be able to do that, it needs to have access. Number two, once it has access, being able to actually complete the transaction means that it needs to know the merchant, in that case, the airline or the hotel, whoever it is, needs to know who's behind the agent, needs to know and needs that to be verified, which means that in some cases that could be a KYC or a KYB, depending on the use case. But in the case of travel, it would be you need a verified phone number, verified email, address, the person's name, birth date, all those things that you need for travel. And you need to be able to securely, obviously, transfer that to that merchant. And then the payment itself, that payment could be using credit card, or it could be using bank, or it could be, any ways that, is available today. It can be done. The problem is today you would have to, the agent would have to actually go and fill out the form that exists today for the humans, because agents really, all they need is an API access. They don't actually need a human checkout experience, right?
Yeah.
That human checkout experience today has been really built for human beings. And therefore, one of the things that it does well is it actually tries to avoid bots being able to fill these forms out. So a lot of times these things are failures, right? Even if the agent is able to get around those blocking technologies, the next thing is that entering the credit card information in that form is not really PCI compliant. And by not being PCI compliant, a lot of times you have failures. So in order for that to be rectified, you need what's coming hopefully soon. We're working with folks like Visa and MasterCard and others, is essentially tokenized credit cards. So tokenized credit cards allow you to essentially do this more through an API model, where in the future, pretty much every merchant in the world is going to have APIs that interact with agents versus a human user experience that's been really tuned for the human consumption. Right now, you will have APIs that are tuned for agents. So those are some of the challenges that exist today, but are, very quickly, a lot of these challenges are being, removed or solved so that agents can now completely do a transaction end to end.
So walk me through that a little bit. So that's, it's giving the agent essentially your wallet and a digital wallet, which we have, but just in kind of a different digital form factor. Is that accurate?
It's basically, it's essentially an API, right? So there's a concept today called MCP, MCPs are basically, think of them, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And Anthropic came out with MCP. And MCPs are essentially, think of them as a way of standardizing how APIs work for agents. And it's essentially, think of it as an API. And that API becomes kind of how a company, enterprise, merchant is able to now tell an agent what's behind the firewall, what's the menu of things they can access, or if they had credentials, be able to consume. So that could be data, that could be travel, that could be content. It could be, obviously, a lot of banks are starting to now look into offering an MCP server to an agent. This could be a scenario where your MCP server is able to provide the latest rates, or or a way for a lending application to be filled out. So there's a lot of different things that you can now provide through these APIs. And what an MCP server does is it really simplifies how agents interact with an enterprise.
You have to dumb everything down for me, Amir. That's why I'm a good host for this. So, I was thinking about a kind of recent example, and yes, I'm gonna say this on air and on recording, and it's okay. I recently bought tickets to go see the Backstreet Boys at the Sphere.
Oh yeah, that's great.
So the anniversary present for the missus. She's a big Backstreet fan. But the reason I bring it up is I thought it was funny when I went to check out Amir. I even took a screenshot of it because it made me laugh so much, like being in this industry. Dude, there was like 37 different ways to pay. I mean, it was like this laundry list of little icons of different ways that I could pay. And I was actually shocked that I couldn't use like a carrier pigeon to deliver gold bullion. Like, I figured we had gotten to that level of an exhaustive list. It was just crazy to me. So how do you feel the, agentic ability to process actions and transactions on our behalf? Like, what does that mean in that world where we just have so many different ways to pay and move money, so many different ways to store our cards, our credentials, our payment methods, so many different types of even ways from, using a credit or debit card to a buy now, pay later? Like, how does this complex ecosystem all fit into this?
Yeah, I think initially it will be much simpler because, this is going to be an evolution where, the agent either has access to a credit card or you may have already, funded an account using your bank account and having access, essentially ability for it to kind of top itself up using your bank account. But over time, what's cool here is that if you're a point junkie like I am, your agent will even be able to choose like what's the best path for you to earn the most points with your credit cards, because you're buying travel, and your Amex Platinum may be the best thing, or your Visa from Chase may be the best thing too. Hey, actually, Josh has some stable coins and we're going to save him some money because this particular merchant is willing to offer you 5% off if you just pay in cash. And stable coins would be like cash, right? Or from your bank account. Doing debit will save you 10% or 5% because you're not using a credit card. So what's beautiful is that you can, as ahead of time, basically provide those rules to your assistant to make those choices on your behalf. And today, you probably miss out on a bunch of those things because as humans, we're not going in there and thinking about like, wait, is this going to give me the most points, or is that? You're just kind of taking out whatever you can, and it comes to easiest to you and using that mechanism. The other thing is like also just around budgeting, right? Like if your agent also has a good understanding of your bank account and has a good understanding of your overall budgeting, there's a lot of interesting things that you're able to do with your assistant in terms of at the moment understanding whether you can afford something or not, or how that fits in with your long-term budget. If you're planning to buy a car and lease a car now, and you're going to have a new $500 payment, like how does that impact your credit? Those are things that today are very difficult for us to understand and project. And we have to be extremely disciplined to have the right infrastructure in place to know how all those things impact our lives. Whereas with agents, in some ways, I think they'll make us stupider because they'll do all that work for us, and we no longer need to go do a lot of that for ourselves.
That is a whole nother interesting concept of, I saw a meme recently that I think is pretty fitting, and it was something like, you should probably get your health and your diet in check now because your doctor is currently passing med school with ChatGPT.
Yeah, well, yeah, and pretty soon we're all doctors too, because we'll just self-diagnose ourselves through ChatGPT. And so, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's my biggest fear, is that honestly, when I look at AI and how it's changed my behavior and how it's changed my daily life, is that there are a lot of things that I kind of just now offload into AI, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever. And that is, a lot less times where I have to really struggle over like crafting an email or making sure that the positioning is correct. It's like, oh wow, that looks really good. Well, little change here and there, send, right? So, I hope that that doesn't have that kind of impact for going forward, especially for our kids. But that is definitely something that I worry about.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you think the impact this has for our kids is going to be, right? Because, you think about a lot of, our generation grew up with and without the internet. And the generation that's coming up now has grown up with and without AI. And there's very quickly becoming a new generation that will know nothing but having agentic AI. What do you think that's going to do for, this is probably a whole nother can of,
yeah.
Well, what is this going to do to society and the implications of that? But
yeah, I feel like it's very similar to the early days of iPad and screen time and kind of the challenges, we all had with our own time and how much screen time we do and our kids do. And that did change. I think social media definitely changed the fabric of the society, and in a lot of ways, not in a good way necessarily. In some ways, there were definitely positive impacts, but there's definitely a lot of negative impacts. I think similarly, the doomsday stories are always, the headline grabbing things. In reality, is we'll adjust and we'll find ways to continue, hopefully, to stay smart. AI is not necessarily going to be in my opinion, I think humans at the end of the day still need to be the ones driving innovation, because AI only knows what it knows from us at the end of the day. So I hope that continues to be the case, and we'll adapt to some of the negative impacts of AI, and hopefully put more emphasis on the positive stuff.
Yeah.
But there's no question it's changing lives, our lives, and of the next generation extremely at a fast pace. So yeah.
Yeah, we were kind of talking about, the pace is what's wild. But I want to go back to you. So when you were talking about payments and agents being able to make payments, right? You were talking about like, what if I'm a points hoarder, which I am? And, what about the introduction of things like stable coins and pay by bank? And, what if we move to a model where it's a, QR code based payment that rides over instant payment rails, right? There are so many things that are happening at once right now that any one of these things could like fundamentally change the fabric of community financial services as we know it in the US. Like any one of them individually. But we've got like 9 of those big things. Don't fact check me on that, but it's a lot happening at the same time right now, where we could see even multiple of those happening and compounding each other. So, as somebody who's been focused on kind of the payments landscape, and like what happens if there's no longer this, Chase gives me 3%, American Express gives me 2.5%. Well, what if I don't even deal with my financial institution anymore? My agent does. My agent couldn't care less about anything other than, I can salvage everything and see that Josh will get a better rate through Chase. So he's going to go through Chase, whether he even realizes it or not. Like, how does that change the landscape?
Yeah, I think that is probably the number one thing in talking with brands and enterprises in our business, because we're very much horizontal. We talk to many different verticals. I'd say that's probably the number one fear that we hear, which is, not owning. They're concerned about not being able to continue to own their customer. And what does that mean? That means like, that checkout experience needs to continue to be owned by the bank or the enterprise or the e-commerce store. The touch point to the customer and where they get their information about the services of that brand and the ability to choose has to still continue to be with the user. And if all that moves much more into the AI land, then obviously like they become more of like a dumb pipe where, that choice really goes away and their ability to stay unique and deliver that uniqueness that they have goes away. So I think embracing AI, embracing ability to bring some of these capabilities in early, and it's not early anymore, but now I think is pretty critical for any enterprise right now, because continuing to own the customer and that touch point is so critical going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about a very simple example that I don't think is too terribly far off is, how easily would it be for me to go to ChatGPT and say, I want to buy this car, go. And it knows that I want to find it, obviously, for the best price, right? And then it knows how much I can and should and will put down as a down payment versus finance. Then it goes and looks at every single financing option on the known universe that I could be, approved for, and is going to solely shop based on the price, right? Because that's kind of its, modus apparatus of what I've instructed it to do. Then, what's the point of the brand at that point? Like, what loyalty do I have to whoever is servicing my loan when I never even see it? My agent just says, hey, got you the car and it's $20 a month cheaper than you thought it was going to be. Here's where you send your payment. Oh, by the way, I'll take care of that for you too.
Yeah. And I think, in today's world, if I have a really good relationship with my banker who's taking care of everything else for me, even if it is $20 more, I may still choose to go with a more expensive one because of all the reasons that you were saying before, which is like, I have that relationship. Frankly, it's not worth it for me to like go and choose something different because I know when I call Bob at the bank, picks up the phone, takes care of my issues for me. Now, in the future, if that becomes the agent taking care of those issues and all of a sudden like that uniqueness starts diminishing, you're going to, that choice is almost made for you. You're not even going to be involved in making the choice because you've already told the prompt, your prompt is find me the best rate with the highest quality service, whatever other criteria you may have, then the result is going to be, this is your choice. And then most likely that's what you'll move forward with because over time, you've also built trust. AI has built trust with you that, okay, it's made some good choices for you in the past. Even when you've done your research, you've been able to convince yourself that it made the right choice for you. At some point, you'll stop making those research and, you won't do research anymore. You'll just trust the fact that it's making the best choice for you, right? And that's, I think, that's where lies, I think, a lot of challenges for enterprises today is that I think people are not seeing that massive wave that's coming here because the adoption curve is so high and things are moving so quickly that it's going to catch a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah, I mean, you think about even just how long it took people to adopt having a smartphone, right? And that, like, the curve to get really saturated adoption took a while, right? I mean, I would argue from the first publicly available ChatGPT to today, the ramp of people using it blows it out of the water, right? I mean, the number of people in my life, Amir, that I would have pegged up and like, there's no way they're using something like ChatGPT. They're like, oh yeah, I used it for this. I did this. I'm using it all the time. I'm like, all right, like.
No, 100. I'll tell you a funny story. So the way I explained to my mom about ChatGPT is I took a picture of a bunch of watermelon at a store and I said, circle the best watermelon for me to buy. And it was like, I got it. It's like, that was just amazing to her. Like the fact that, it was able to tell you which watermelon based on the picture is the best one, that's going to be the sweetest one to choose, right? That's how I got my mom hooked on, like, okay, this is one way to use ChatGPT. And when you do things like that are just so incredible that you would never thought could be so accessible to you, you become a believer very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a good example because it makes me think of, you were kind of talking about this earlier too, and especially as we get further and further into like, okay, so let's use your example of the watermelon. Let's just say ChatGPT got it wrong. There was a better watermelon, right? It's not like catastrophic. Okay. But if, ChatGPT books me my flight and I show up to the airport and there ain't no flight,
yeah,
we got a problem. Or if it goes to book my flight and instead of paying $500 for the ticket, it adds a zero, it pays $5,000. And now I miss my mortgage payment because I don't have enough money. Now we got issues, right? So the severity level of mistakes goes up pretty significantly. I think, especially when we start talking about, certain use cases. And, a funny one for us recently, my son woke up one morning just covered head to toe in all these crazy looking like blotches and like raised and gnarly looking. And, my wife and I are terrified. We're like, oh my gosh, we've never seen anything like this on him before. So I kind of did exactly what you did. I literally took a picture of him without his shirt on, put it into ChatGPT, and I was like, what's going on with my 4-year-old? Right. And Amir, man, I'm so glad I didn't show it to my wife because she would have been a wreck. Like it went down the, like, he's dying tomorrow route. And it was terrifying.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah. So I don't think that's really true. I was like, here, let me give you an extra piece of insight. He had an ear infection. He's on amoxicillin. Is this hives and potentially just a reaction to amoxicillin? Could he maybe be just allergic to penicillin? ChatGPT. Oh yeah, that's probably definitely it. It was totally just kissing my butt and just trying to make me sound like I was smart and new. Turns out that actually was what it was. He had, this was his second round of being on a penicillin. Sometimes the body takes 2 cycles to develop the allergy to it. And that's what happened to him, right? He just got a bad case of hives, put him on Benadryl for a week. He's right as rain. Now we know, don't give him penicillin, right? But, if we had just gone down the ChatGPT route, like that would have been a really terrifying experience. Now, are those things getting better? That's what I would argue what we were talking about earlier. Like I would not be surprised if I ran that exact same experiment today, if it did a better job today than it did last time. Like that's how fast it's improving. But I think the argument I'm trying to make is that especially when we get into these more life or death, like bigger consequence types of things that we're allowing agents to do, like there's got to be a lot more controls around it. And I would argue that's probably why financial services has been a little bit more, hesitant to go gung-ho into some of these things. Right? Like I use the example, like it would be really easy for an AI LLM to look at my financial picture and say, oh, you have a bunch of cash sitting in your checking account. Your credit union offers a CD that would earn you 5% on that. You're leaving money on the table. Let's move that money over. And if it's really confident at it, and like you were saying, like if I've just gotten so used to trusting it, I'm like, great, let's do that. But that cash was sitting there because that was what was going to make my mortgage payment in a week. And now I can't make my mortgage payment. And I've got to liquidate the CD and I've got to pay the penalties on it. Then it actually didn't do me any good. So, I mean, there's an interesting, like, as the models get better, we're going to solve for some of those things. But still, like you were talking about, I mean, it's really a complex ecosystem of things that we've got to get right. But because it's such a complex ecosystem of things, I would also argue it's a huge opportunity area, right? Like we were just talking about. I mean, both of us travel a bunch for work, right? I mean, it's a pain in the butt to book all these flights and stuff. I would love it if I could just tell my agent, I need to be in Austin, go look at my calendar, figure out my meetings, and go book the flights that I need, the hotel that I need, get me a rental car if I need it, all the things. You know me, go take care of it.
But that's why I think, that's why I think actually there is a lot of opportunity for financial institutions, because I'm going to have a lot more trust, right, especially today, using an agent, for example, that's being delivered by my bank to do anything related to finances. because my expectation, because of the trust that I've built over time with my bank, is that it's safeguarding my money. So it should also have built and delivered an agent experience that's going to continue safeguarding my money. And if something even happens, my expectation is that they'll take care of it. Like that's on them. Whereas I think an external agent doing that's not his expertise, more of a jack of all trade. I think there's much higher chance of potentially things happening that you didn't intend to happen. So to me, this is where we have a period of time where I think there is huge opportunity for those who move faster and are able to kind of provide these, kind of aha moment experiences for their users. Because all of a sudden, something that was very difficult to do before, and you had to go through a bunch of steps, physically showing up at a branch or having to pick up the phone and talk to a bunch of different people to get answers around, can now very easily be in a more self-serve model. You can provide it to your customers and deliver this kind of like amazing experience that they've never seen from their financial institution. And to me, that's a really big opportunity to capitalize on before others do, because once those users go somewhere else, it's really hard to pull them back.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amir. I mean, I would say anytime I talk to community financial institutions, like, what are you trying to solve with technology? Usually the two biggest things that come out of it are user experience for their account holders and operational efficiency for their institution, right? And yeah, I would agree with you. I think those are two huge areas that AI can have a really positive impact if used appropriately and with the right use cases. And, when you talk about account holder experiences, it really is like, it's about convenience. It's about not having to worry and think. I mean, finance is a stressful thing. And having something that's kind of always in your corner, specializing in you and your finances, is a pretty sexy idea, if you ask me. So I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah, and also just think, basically planning ahead for you, being able to budget when you didn't even ask it to do budgeting for you, ability to be able to point out opportunities. Like, for example, in my case, I had a little bit of money sitting in a checking account earning zero interest that was just sitting there, right? Like, if my financial institution proactively came to me and said, hey, actually, you haven't touched this thing in like 6 months, a year. You should move this into an interest-bearing account. And you know what? I'll do it for you. Just let me know if you're okay with that. Without me having to, like, there's been moments where before, like, a banker has called me and left me a message. But even the concept of like dialing a number, trying to get through to my banker and to have that conversation takes up like an hour of my time, right? And
yeah,
that could be done so much faster and easier. And then more importantly, when proactively I'm told, hey, I can make more money. Wow, that's a cool experience, right? That's kind of where we are. And I think those that kind of capitalize on that and are able to deliver that kind of experience to their customers, I think are going to win. I mean, there's no question about that.
You were mentioning earlier, you had a couple of like fun use cases or examples. Were there any that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to share?
I think the one I like is, there's two that I like. One is there's always that restaurant you want to reserve for where like they release the new seats at like 12:01 a.m., right? And they do it like 1 month before reservations, a new block of reservations open up, right? I mean, who wants to be up at 12 a.m. to try to like reserve a table? How nice it would be to just set your agent to do that for you, and next morning you wake up. And by the way, as part of that experience, it has to put a credit card down to hold the reservation and all the things that you need to do as a human. So that's one example. Obviously, getting that Taylor Swift ticket for your kids is another example of like things that we hate to do, which is, trying to be the first one to get a concert ticket or, a football game or whatever that may be. Because even in cases where you're looking at StubHub or looking at, alternatives, you spend so much time trying to figure out whether the best seat with the best price, and there's no one site that does that for you, right?
Yeah.
But an agent can definitely do it very quickly and efficiently and be able to tell you, hey, wait another 6 days because we think there's a high chance the prices are going to drop based on the demand we've seen, right? And that's true for travel, that's true for concert tickets, that's true for a lot of those things that today, like, people just, those are not things that are enjoyable to do. But at the end of the day, you do it because you want to make sure you're getting the best deal and the best experience. So I think those are things that I think are going to really change our life for the better when it comes to agents.
So I'm curious. I have maybe a little bit different thought on that. What happens when we all have agents that are doing that, though, right? And the restaurant only has 10 seats, and there's 1,000 people that would have had to stay up late, and it's the 10 people that stayed up late and hit the button first, versus now we just have 1,000 agents battling against each other for the 10 seats. Like, what happens to commerce in that?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's already happening without even agents. I mean, even before agents were a thing, meaning, scalpers, that's what they use. They use agents, right?
Yeah.
So that is already happening. I think what's unique here and the opportunity is that being able to actually now have verified agents where it's not spam and it's not fraud, you're actually going to lower the number of people coming in. And more importantly, like, very popular concerts are going to be able to differentiate between a scalper and a human agent, because now if you have a verified Josh agent, that seller, that merchant knows you're an individual that's trying to buy. And by the way, it probably also knows your history. And that's one of the ways that actually banks, especially retail banks, can help is retail bank can essentially tokenize your identity and your purchasing history, right, through the bank experience as an example. So there is ways to essentially know that this agent really is working on behalf of a human versus a scalper that's trying to buy 100 tickets. Yeah. And I actually think it can improve a lot of things as it relates to things that have really high demand, because now the people who deserve it will be able to access those things much better and more efficiently.
Yeah, so my wife used to work at Nike, and while she was
perfect
at Nike,
example,
like, people would ask her all the time, like, hey, can you help me get the latest Jordans drop? Right?
Yep.
And the answer was always no. Like, employees have to go through the exact same process. Like, you got to go to the website, and people would always tell us, I think this is exactly your example. People would always tell us, like, man, this sucks, because like, there's so many people that have bots that are just running around and they're buying them all up. And even if I'm sitting there at midnight ready to click the button, I still never get a pair of shoes. And then that bot buys 100 pairs and then turns around and puts them on eBay for 100 times the cost. And that's the only way I can access them. I actually want the shoes. Like, I don't want to resell them. I really want that pair of shoes. And it sucks for them as a verified buyer who really just wants to own that pair of Jordans and walk around in those pair of Jordans, because a bot bought 100 of them to put on eBay to make money for somebody.
In that example, actually, Josh, Nike would know that you have come and bought the last 3 drops and you've only bought 1, right? So there's even more information that Nike will have about you in the future that allows it to make a decision on whether not only are you a loyal customer, but also a real customer versus the bot example you gave. So, and of course, it's going to take a little bit of time, and Nike needs to have an agentic checkout experience to be able to support that model. Mm-hmm. But we're not that far, like that's possible today. And especially with tokenized credit cards, it's going to be even easier. And that's where I think things will improve versus not when it comes to these experiences.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, as we get to a point of, being able to have verified digital identity tied to that, plus tokenized data in an open banking standardized messaging set format, then all of this stuff becomes possible. And in all reality, like you said, that is actually possible today. But a part of it is almost even just training consumers and consumer behavior about that. Because I would imagine there's probably a wide range of people on the spectrum of accepting of that. And I use the example of I won't say her name because she'll pipe up in the kitchen, but the Amazon helper lady, right? In the speaker.
Yeah.
And I remember when those first came out, and you had polarizing camps of, I don't want that thing snooping in my house, to me. And I was like, wait, it can turn my lights on for me and I don't have to get up? Yeah, go for it. Bring it in. Like, I got nothing to hide. Amazon's already got my data. It's fine. And so, getting consumers wrapped around this concept of sharing tokenized data is actually safe. It's actually, yes, you could argue it's creepy, right? That Nike knows so much about you, but let's be real. Let's say you really wanted that pair of Jordans and you could never, ever get them, but now you can. Would you argue that you're happy with that? Like, I would probably say yes. So I think there's an interesting balance in just getting consumer behavior to accept that when they understand, what all this means.
Yeah. And also you will be able to control how much your agent provides in terms of information. So, I think there is going to be actually potentially more control over what you want to share and what you don't want to share, because now your agent is going to be working on your behalf. Now, as consumers, we have to be smart about which agents we use and who we trust. Mm-hmm. But I think those brands who bring that transparency to you and provide you that control are going to win because of exactly that reason, because you're going to want to work with, brands that are actually going to be on your side and are going to make sure that, you're not being duped by the information that's being shared.
Well, and so that opens up a whole nother topic that you had kind of touched on, which is, you wake up as a founder every day and you're like, okay, what happened while I was asleep for the last 4 hours? Like, oh, great, the whole world turned upside down again in my space. Great. What do we got to pivot on? As buyers of technology right now, that's also a real challenge. I'm probably going to get the facts wrong, so nobody hold me to it. But there was a recent story that came out that there was an AI startup company that was writing code using AI. And, they were an overnight success, grew to $1 billion valuation. And then it was uncovered. There was no AI. There was no platform. It was literally a bunch of engineers in an office in India. And when you submitted a prompt to write the code, like literally there was 100 people there quickly writing code, right? There's no AI. And immediately funding dries up. Obviously, you got the whole shenanigans that fall out from that. But I mean, can you imagine if you were a buyer of that software and you're like, crud? Like, so how should, financial institutions be looking at doing business with companies in kind of this new world of stuff changes so fast?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where actually financial institutions have a leg up, because I think there's a lot of rigor in place already to do a lot of due diligence around, technology that is brought in because of all the security issues and because of the fact that, basically penetration of, bad actors within a financial institution is really dangerous. So I think from some aspects, I think there's some already rigor in place to understand what they're signing up to. But I think the way, at least I think about it, is, first starting out with the stuff that's not going to be impacting, let's say, people's money, right? Like initially, it's simply having an agent that is able to answer say the top 50 questions that typically, someone at the bank is picking up the call for, right? And being able to do that in natural language and simply being, very quickly allowing their customers to be able to not only find that information, but to be able to act on it and do something, right? For me, that's like a simple first step that is not going to impact, at the end of the day, someone's financial, well-being or the money that they have in the bank, as an example. And then layering on, as the bank has a better understanding of AI technology and the companies that they're dealing with, starting to layer on other capabilities. Now, having said all that, I think it's critical to own what impacts, the most critical path for their use, for their users, in this case being their money. The bank has to own that. They have to understand that technology and how it's basically impacting their systems. And I think that's the biggest challenge a lot of companies have right now, is that they're having to bring in a lot of consultants and paying, large sums of money for transformation projects because just a lot of times having AI at the edge only solves so much of the problem. You need the rest of your organization to be essentially AI enabled and AI ready. Because if, let's say, an AI agent, for example, wants to move money from a checking account to a saving account to gain more interest, I'm just making that up, today, how does it do that? There's probably 5 human physical checks that have to happen before that money moves, right? So how does an AI agent able to do that? So those are things that basically I think has to evolve over time and has to be owned by the bank themselves. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult to make good decisions there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. No, I mean, it is. It really comes down to due diligence and what's the real value it's going to add. Because I think there's a lot of shiny squirrel syndrome right now in AI. And your point is well said. Like, it may solve for this, but it may open up this or not solve for this. And so does it really actually add value? Maybe, maybe not, right? Like, those are the things that kind of need to be taken into consideration.
Absolutely. Like, I think as a bank customer, like filling out a lending application is probably one of the things, least things I like, about dealing with a bank, as an example. Like, that should be much easier to do. And that doesn't necessarily, need to impact the, some of the more critical, capabilities of the bank, right? But it can really simplify how I see this bank as a forward-thinking company that is simplifying my life. And with a very simple, agent, not only can it fill my lending application out, but my next credit card application and everything else that I need to do with the bank, I shouldn't have to keep repeating the same information over and over again, as an example.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think too, it's probably worth noting, I would argue there's probably 2 very distinct buckets that you need to think about in terms of AI utilization. And it's the stuff that you can do that's low hanging fruit that doesn't even require enterprise level stuff. Right.
Exactly.
It's not using proprietary or personal data or information, that it's okay to live in a public world. That's okay to put into a public ChatGPT. But arguably in a, financial services infrastructure, the vast majority of what you're going to do and the vast majority of the value you're going to get is actually when you are providing, more sensitive information. And that has got to be done with lots of safeguards in place. And that's where a big chunk of the due diligence needs to be done, to make sure you understand what data is being used, how's that data being used, where is it going, what's it feeding back into the model, right? Is your data protected?
Absolutely. Agreed.
Yeah. Amir, I feel like we've gone through a ton of different, parts of this conversation. Is there anything that we missed? Anything we're forgetting? Anything you wanted to bring up?
No, look, I think, I think we're at an exciting time right now. And there is definitely, I know your audience is a lot of folks in the banking space. I think there's a lot of opportunity to embrace a few, like if I was, not being a banker or being in your shoes, Josh, who obviously your day-to-day is dealing with banks, the areas that I would definitely pay attention to, one is stable coins, which I think is something that is coming fast, and we're hearing a lot more enterprises being interested in, and being able to embrace that because it can bring some really good benefits to their customers. I think that's one category. And the other piece is really around, how do you get merchants ready for this new agentic commerce world? And banks definitely have a very strong position for that. And then of course the user itself has data and an identity that needs to be tokenized for this AI world. And that's another area where there's a lot of value in data that banks have. So that would be really where I would spend a lot of time, really trying to understand Digi and how banks can position themselves.
Yeah, great closing thoughts, honestly. I don't have anything to add. Ditto. Amir, seriously, thank you so much for coming and being a guest on the podcast. But before I let you go, I've got two final questions for you. So, especially going back to what we were talking about the other day, just how fast the space that you operate in changes. I got to know, where do you go to get information to stay up to date? Like, what's the first thing you check in the morning?
I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that comes to me on a daily basis, but I'll tell you, Twitter basically is something that a lot of good innovation you see there first. Folks are posting there, especially in the AI space. MIT Tech Review is really cool. The information a lot of times does really good in-depth pieces, and they're really looking for trends. So I like the information. And then the OpenAI blog is a great one. If you don't follow it, I think it is a good one to follow.
Awesome. And then if people want to connect with you, or if they want to learn more about Skyfire, where and how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm just Amir at skyfire.xyz, or you guys can go to our website, www.skyfire.xyz.
Awesome. Thank you again, sir. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's always funny when, AI and or payments or both come into the conversation. It literally is. It's like, okay, this again. But it is always really interesting to see, because there's so many different facets to this, where everybody's head is at with this. And I think this has been a really unique set of conversation that we really haven't had thus far about what this intersection of AI, payments, commerce, and how it impacts like our everyday lives. It's really the first time I've ever been able to have this conversation with somebody. So it's been really fascinating.
Thank you for having me, Josh. It was really fun. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming and being a guest on the Digital Banking Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast, powered by Typhone. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.